is it's just gone 9:30 on a Wednesday morning, and I'm here with Simon. How do I pronounce your surname, my friend?
Kuestenmacher.
Kuestenmacher. I always like to ask. I've made so many mistakes in the past, and I hate doing it in public forums. This is episode 13 of Start, Scale, Grow, a podcast for tech businesses that are starting, scaling, or growing. And I've been an admirer of your work for a little while now. First found out about you via one of your blog pieces that we'll talk about shortly. But thank you for being here. For those heathens that might not have heard of you, did you want to take a minute or so to introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Absolutely. So I'm Simon Kuestenmacher. I'm a demographer. I run a little business called the Demographics Group, and we do just exactly what it sounds like. We look at demographics all day long, every day, and try to make sense of the world. As a business, we are a speaking business and we are a consulting business, and I also write a weekly column for the New Daily and a monthly column for the Australian. So there is constant need for new storytelling from a demographic perspective, which I would argue very self-serving narrative is easy enough because demographics, while they aren't everything, they are definitely everywhere. Every business, every industry is in some way or form shaped by demographics, and that's what we try to analyze. And then we try to view a specific sector of society, of the business world, through the demographic lens.
Perfect. Thank you. And I think the reason I was so keen to have this conversation was the tech sector in general has been through, I think, what's been unfavorably called the tech wreck over the last few years, where we've seen a lot of layoffs from tech companies, both big and small, as they respond to the market forces that are impacting them. And as we know, all these things are cyclical, and at some stage, those companies will probably need to hire again if they're going to do that in Australia. We've got this sort of quite unique marketplace here, and the demographics that I'm sure you're going to share some info on have a huge impact on the way that those businesses build their workforces and the makeup of those workforces. In your opinion, what's the sort of current state of play in Australia from a workforce demographic perspective?
Well, the workforce, the single biggest issue for most industries and most businesses in the coming years, decade plus, will be the skills shortage. Will be a lack of skilled workers. Sometimes in Australia, we are a bit complacent. We think, no worries if we don't have the right amount of workers now. We are a migration nation. We can just import the talent from overseas. And while we do that as much as we can, the order of magnitude of the skills shortage is so severe that we can't migrate our way out of it. We need to really restructure the workforce. We need to rethink the way we run every business, every industry in this country to make sure we get away with what I would call as a constrained workforce environment. The reason we have the skills shortage is not to do with the pandemic. Yes, the pandemic made it worse because the federal government early on made it very clear that no financial assistance was going to be handed out to temporary visa holders, so they buggered off. That created a dip of maybe 300,000 people in the Australian workforce out of 14 million jobs. That had a real impact. But now the pandemic is over for all intents and purposes, and we still have the skills shortage. And this is not going to go away because it is baked into the demographic pie of this country. Over the next decade plus, we have the big fat baby boomer generation retiring. They leave the world of work at one end of the spectrum. They are, of course, allowed to retire. Retirement is not a new phenomenon either. But previously, when a bunch of people retired, you had a bigger cohort enter at the other end of the spectrum. This is not that easy at the moment. Because lots and lots of these young people in the early 20s that we have in Australia, they're not actually part of the workforce. They are here on temporary student visas. They're not helping to fill those skill shortages. Plus, people stay in the educational system for just one more degree. So we push the starting date of your career, we push it ever further back. So we actually lose talent. We don't take enough talent in at the young end. As if this imbalance, big cohort out, not that many people in, as if this imbalance wasn't bad enough. For the next 13, 14 years, we also have the biggest generation of them all, the Millennials, people born in the 80s and 90s. We have them continuing to make babies. That
Mm.
means they go on parental leave, at least temporarily. The
Yeah.
skills shortage is here to stay. We are literally
Mm.
running out of people. On top of
Yeah.
this, we create so much more demand for workers in this country. For in the next 14 years, for example, we are doubling the 85 plus cohort in this country from just under 600,000 people to just under 1.2 million people. Half of this population needs care. This care
Mm.
could be provided by a family member, but more often
Yeah.
than not, it is nowadays provided by an aged care professional. And that alone tells me we have so much more demand for work. There is
Mm.
really an ethical argument that you need to take care of your old elderly people. That means we
Yeah.
will import aged care workers, and the more people we import into the health and care system, the fewer
Mm.
people are available on the skilled migration list to distribute to, let's say, tech jobs.
Yeah. Yeah. Gotcha. The it's not a pretty picture, is it?
No, it's quite severe.
Yeah.
But you can also put this from, if you zoom out even more, you'd say, how dramatic is it? In the
Mm.
aged care sector that we just spoke about, it is
Yeah.
absolutely catastrophic.
Mm.
It is a catastrophe in the making.
Yeah.
In all other sectors, I would say, well, with smart use of technology, we can probably cheat our way out of this. We need to
Yeah.
become much more productive.
Mm.
And so we talk about AI, robotics, automation.
Mm.
We're not making jobs redundant. What we
Mm.
are doing is we are speeding up tasks.
Mm.
Very few jobs exist just out of a single task. Most jobs
Yeah.
are much more complex. And I
Mm.
want the back end of a job. We spend so much time doing boring compliance,
Mm.
just kind of record keeping elements
Yeah.
in all of our jobs. This could be done faster with
Yeah.
automation. Do
Yeah.
this so that then the existing workers that we have, that they can actually utilize their time better.
Mm.
And in some way or form, we're talking about a complete restructuring of industries. If I may pick housing as an example, housing, obviously, we have
Mm.
a massive housing shortage. Everyone knows this.
Yeah.
House prices are stupendously high, and we're building housing in an old-fashioned way. Housing as an industry, construction, has not changed whatsoever over the last
Mm.
70 years.
Mm.
Couple more cool new materials. That's about it.
Yeah.
Why is housing still sitting in the construction industry? Housing
Yeah.
should be sitting in manufacturing. We should
Mm.
manufacture housing. Nothing makes me, from a skills shortage perspective, more angry than a tradie in a car. This is wasted time. Build houses under a big roof. You don't have any bad weather impacting the build. You utilize the skills of the talent much
Yeah.
more, and you pretty much get rid of building waste, material waste on
Mm.
site.
Mm.
A standard building site has material wastage of around 25 to 30%, which is
Yeah.
an environmental catastrophe. It's
Mm.
also stupendously expensive.
Yeah.
So this is one thing. Under a roof, a factory built home probably allows us to build homes faster with fewer
Mm-hmm.
materials and fewer labor. That is the
Yeah.
kind of disruption that I'm
Mm.
talking about we need in order to operate our economy with what I would call a constrained workforce. We really need to, deconstruct every industry and then have an idea of what we might, run instead.
Mm. Mm. And all of that, particularly the building of houses at a initial level makes complete sense. Yes, that sounds logical. From a white collar perspective, though, and I also agree with automating tasks that are highly repetitive and linear, so that people with brains can work on solving bigger problems. I absolutely understand that. But asking whole industries to disrupt themselves because of a perceived by the industry itself workforce problem is probably easier said than done.
Oh,
Do you?
it's an uphill battle for sure.
I think the onus lies on companies to be the masters of their own destiny. One of the things that I suggested in a white paper we did recently was where are the unis for technology, for people to learn technology, that are big technology companies, the Canvas, the Atlassians, getting a chip in from federal government? Where are they building universities in remote regions so that people from these regions that normally wouldn't get tech jobs can go and learn, get the skills they need, and then work remotely? There are, in my opinion, there are perhaps not huge pools, but there's certainly pools of potential employees to do some of these jobs that just don't get access to them because of where they're located, and they don't get access to the education that they could get in order to get those jobs.
Yeah. Oh, and just structurally speaking, if we talk about
Mm.
tech jobs, they traditionally are highly educated and highly
Mm-hmm.
formally trained staff.
Mm-hmm.
You'd say, is this a problem? Because about 50% of a year 12 cohort will end up going to university these days.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably a bit much, isn't it? Half
Yeah.
of the workforce, but that's half of a year level. That's what
Yeah.
we're doing now. As I said,
Mm-hmm.
why is the tech industry then complaining about shortages there? Surely
Yeah.
young people are, digital natives. They like technology. I
Mm-hmm.
say, well, potentially we'll see a doubling down on what are called traditionally middle skill jobs, TAFE level type jobs, because we have this insane shortage in the trades. And so
Mm-hmm.
that then means we now have plumbers taking home 200, 300,000 bucks.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, this industry, due to the massive shortage, becomes much more attractive. And if
Mm-hmm.
you are smart and you run your own business as a tradie,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
are, even if it's a sole trader business, you
Mm.
earn 27% more than if you're employed.
Yeah.
That's throughout a 40-year working career. That's an additional
Yeah.
decade of money that you
Mm.
earn.
Mm.
That
Mm.
is fun. So I'd say
Yeah.
the tech industry is competing more with everyone, and now even with middle
Mm.
skill jobs, because they are
Mm.
becoming more attractive. We'll make TAFE education universally free in the next couple of years. I'm absolutely
Yeah.
certain about that. And university will continue to charge money for. So
Mm. Mm.
that made sense traditionally because uni pays.
Mm.
The more highly educated you are, the more money you
Yeah.
make. It's statistically
Mm.
speaking
Mm.
that simple. But with the skills shortage in those middle skill jobs, now
Mm.
they are pretty juicy incomes for the
Yeah.
go get it type person.
And do you think that the HEX debt, there's a lot of dialogue recently about HEX debt and how crippling that can be. Do you think that this constant dialogue around that is impacting the decisions that young people make as whether to go to uni or not?
Well, it makes it not much more attractive.
Mm.
And you
Mm.
think that you want to remember that people operate in the real world. So
Yeah.
young people these days enter the world of work with a very pessimistic outlook because
Mm.
they
Mm.
think, well, first and foremost, they think, well, the world is going to burn. There's not much more left. I think they're very pessimistic about the future of the
Yeah.
world. The assessment of the status quo of the planet is
Yep.
terrible. That's not a
Yeah.
good starting point. They feel the
No.
system is rigged against them, meaning
Mm.
I can work my butt off and I still can't get into a house ever.
Mm.
Even
Mm.
rentals are stupendously expensive, so whatever. So I better get away with the bare minimum. So
Mm.
if you want those workers that go all in throughout their 20s, the
Yeah.
traditional startup, first generation startup type
Mm.
worker, that's rough to
Yeah.
find those because you go, what does it take to actually get ahead here?
Mm.
It's
Mm.
hard for young
Mm.
people.
Mm.
So you want to
Mm.
have on a national level, you want to have a narrative for young people that says it is worth it. Your
Mm.
effort will actually be rewarded in the bare minimum of being able to afford a family-sized home and
Yeah.
have a decent quality of life. And
Mm.
as long as this pitch doesn't work, you find it very hard for young people to say, I'll get, one more degree, one more this and that.
Mm.
It's a
Mm.
challenge
Yeah.
for young people.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on those young people going overseas? They finish uni, they want to go overseas for a year, and I'm guessing some come back, some don't. Do you have many thoughts on
Well,
that phenomenon?
I would argue the reason why we essentially now mainstreamed the idea of a gap year has to do with young people's search for meaning in their life.
Mm.
As a cohort, where does their meaning in life come from? It's not from religion. That's out. They're all a bunch of atheists, so definitely it
Mhm.
doesn't come from religion.
Yeah.
Also, it doesn't come from family, whereas their parents might have started families in their early 20s. They start families, if they start them at all, in their mid to late 30s. So there is
Wow.
about 2 decades after leaving high school where the meaning of life must come from somewhere. And so it makes sense that you go, I try desperately to look for meaning in life at travel, at yoga retreats, at festivals, at photographing my lunch, at, sculpting the body that I think will fulfill me with meaning in my life. All of these are attempts to fill this meaning-shaped hole in your soul, so to speak. And in the process, obviously, you figure that, hey, I better make work meaningful. Because after all, I hang out here for 8 to 10 hours every day. Why the hell wouldn't I want to make it meaningful? And I think that is a recipe for disaster, this obsession with essentially telling yourself that if your job doesn't perfectly match and align with your values, with the inner core of being, that you are a failure, that your job is a failure in life, you're wasting your career away. Because how likely, just statistically speaking, do you think it is that we can align our 14 million jobs in Australia with 14 million individual passions and desires? I'm sure there'll be some sort of overlap. Some people will be granted perfect ikigai type job, whatever. That's fine for them. It's lovely. It's better to have such a job than to not have such a job. But it is a recipe for disaster on a population type level, because most people won't have it. So most people will feel inadequate in their job. I call this this phenomenon work image issues. So it's the office equivalent to body image issues, where we look at these sexy models on Instagram and bodybuilders on Instagram, and then we look at our own bodies and we go, could be better. We have millions of young people in this country that are miserable, that look at their job and they think there must be more to life than doing spreadsheets for NAB. And I guess there must be. And there is. But it's unfair to think that your job, particularly your early career job, will provide you with meaning. Which organization gives highly strategic, meaningful, impactful jobs to their graduate cohort? Makes no sense. You need to wiggle your way into those kind of jobs, positions over quite a few years. And that's hard. But so essentially, in the meantime, all we have is a bunch of young people that are miserable in their jobs. We have millions of young people, real numbers, millions of young people on antidepressants. The census for the first time, 2021 census, asked for the first time, do you have a medically diagnosed chronic health condition? Not self-diagnosed, medically diagnosed. 1 in 4 young women in their early 20s, 1 in 4, said they have a medically diagnosed chronic mental health condition. That is bonkers. And I'm not telling you or the audience any of this because I have a solution for this. I don't. I can just hope that this obsession with meaningful work gets softened in people's 30s when they start making families. And then all of a sudden, the pain of working for NAB is worth it because you provide money and housing and shelter, whatever, for your beloved family. That makes sense then. But in the meantime, I can only beg people to not be so obsessed with their jobs having to be meaningful. A good enough job is just that. It's good enough, and good is the main word in here.
There's a whole cohort. I've had this conversation a couple of times recently. There's a whole cohort of workers that came into the workforce in either sort of late 2019, early 20, and were directly impacted by the pandemic, who've never been to the office 5 days a week, have had to do the commute 5 days a week, have had to sit on public transport next to someone 5 days a week, maybe have a cruddy day at work, a difficult discussion around performance with their manager, and then have to come in the next day. They can't just turn off the camera on a Zoom meeting, but they've got to go in and sit next to that person and see people. There's a whole cohort of people who've never experienced that, which to me, the more I think about it, is mind blowing. But I think that's a real problem that we don't fully understand the impact of just yet.
Absolutely. So as general career advice to young people in their 20s, starting out their careers, would be go to the office as much and for as long as possible, because you learn so much just by soaking up the information that is floating around you. And in the office, you are asking more questions than you would remotely. that is how you learn. You overhear war stories, you hear people answering the phone, these kind of things you normalize, you learn what kind of culture is around the organization. Yeah, so that's the argument from a knowledge perspective, from a career perspective. You should definitely double down, hunker down in the 20s, in your 20s, go into the office. Absolutely. You now, of course, have the young people that are entering the workforce now being digital natives, very, very much impacted by the pandemic. You and I, we thought the pandemic sucked. We were absolutely annoyed by it. We did not enjoy it. But we were well and truly out of our formative years at this stage. Formative years in generational research refer to roughly, the early teens to the early 20s.
Okay.
And that's what happens to you in this period. The political, the technological environment that you grow up in this period of your life, that shapes your outlook forever. We know this in a lasting way. And so we don't really know, because people are essentially still living through this in a way, how exactly this will play out. But I would say, well, it has real impacts. These are years when you learn about socializing, when you learn about cultural norms in an in-person way. So that fell away. So my advice to organizations would be, you need to make sure to get your young staff into the office right now. And you need to do much more what I would consider work 101 upskilling type training. This is, if you've ever made the mistake and you just called an 20-year-old staff member of yours, you know what I'm talking about. This is just it's a norm, a cultural norm that shifted. It's, you don't just call people. You set this up beforehand, and you feel almost like invaded in your privacy if you receive a call, and that's a different mindset. And it's part of this intergenerational conflict that we are dealing with in organizations, because we now have a cohort entering the world of work that is different to the previous generations. That was always the case. But now, just what is different is a bit different. And I think one of the things that the older generations are absolutely failing to wrap their head around is that the basic economic setup, the basic leverage that workers have shifted. If you take baby boomers born in the 80 years following the end of the Second World War, when they started their careers, they were a big fat cohort competing for a limited number of jobs. If you won a job, if you had a job, there was a big success. Hold on to this job, treasure, value this job, work really hard to hold on to this job of yours. That's their mindset. That's their understanding of what you should do in the workforce. Now we'll skip Gen X, we'll skip Millennials, we go straight to the Gen Zs that are entering the world of work right now. Those guys are a small cohort entering the world of work in terms of record low unemployment, a prolonged skills shortage. They're highly educated. They can charge whatever the hell they want. They have so much more leverage than baby boomers had it back in the day. And that drives baby boomers mad, because if those two generations talk to each other, they actually think they are on different planets. So as a manager, as a business owner, you need to navigate these kind of conflicts. It is always important to ensure that one person understands the worldview, the perspective of another person. And if you just started your careers with a very, very different hand that was dealt to you, there is conflict, intergenerational conflict. You particularly right now have this fun situation where I would argue, I would tell young people, go to the office, work hard in your 20s. You have essentially endless energy in your 20s. It's a great decade to just double down on everything, to go full throttle. So go to the office, work your butt off, lots of face-to-face interactions with all types of customers and colleagues. That's important. The problem is that the folks that they were meant to learn from, the millennials, people born in the 80s and 90s, they are now on cruise control in their careers. They're their middle managers. They just started making babies. They moved to the outskirts of town, far away from the offices. They will fight tooth and nail to go to the office. They have no motivation, no benefit whatsoever by coming to the office, because they have families. They want to be very involved parents. They have a longer commute than ever, so they're more motivated than ever to cut down the commute. They go to the office if they really cannot avoid it. So you could say, well, young people are missing out on the wisdom, the skills of middle management.
Yeah.
That's true. That means as an
Mm.
organization, you need to purposefully create excuses to ensure that you get the information of your millennial staff into the heads
Mm.
of your
Mm.
Gen Z junior staff. You need to purposefully create this.
Yeah.
This doesn't
Yeah.
happen automatically anymore.
Yeah.
It's annoying for the middle managers because they need to do more work.
Mm.
But I
Mm.
think that's the situation you need to just cope with.
Yeah. It's hard to think of a time where the differences between these two end cohorts in the workplace, the differences in their worldview and their world opinion could be more stark, isn't it? It's
Well,
hard
I
to think
think
of
I
that.
think if we look back historically, the worldview what baby boomers did in the 60s, that was massive. There was probably a bigger
Mm.
cultural shift.
Right.
The situation we're finding ourselves in at the moment or for the next 10 years is that we have four generations in the workforce
Mm.
simultaneously. So we
Mm.
have baby boomers in there, born in the well 40s, 50s, and early 60s.
Yeah.
And those guys are big cohort by the
Mm.
sheer order
Mm.
of magnitude. They're changing absolutely everything. They changed every
Yeah.
stage of the life cycle ever. They're in positions of power. They are all asset rich. They hold 80% of the cash savings. They are an extremely powerful generation. They are the last generation, though, that cares about hierarchy. So all the younger people are reasonably allergic towards anything that smells like a hierarchy.
Right.
So organizations need to flatten the hierarchical structures to be attractive for the young workers and to retain staff.
Mm.
And then
Mm.
now in leadership positions in Australia, you become CEO at 52, prime minister at 54, and this is
Yeah.
the time of the life cycle that Gen X finds itself in. Gen
Mm.
X is people born in the 60s and 70s, and Gen X is a very special generation because it is a tiny generation sandwiched between two big ones. So it's the middle child
Right.
of Australia, if you will, the forgotten
Mm-hmm.
generation. But their upbringing is extremely unique because they are the only generation in Australia ever that grew up unsupervised. It was the first generation where both parents worked. So they
Yep.
were called the latchkey generation, coming home to an empty house, and
Right.
the parents never they said stuff like, just come back home when the street lights turn on, or
Yep.
don't, we don't care.
Yep.
So they were raised on this really long leash because we didn't have a childcare network across the country
Yep.
established just yet. So by default, they turned out to be this self-reliant, pragmatic generation. So
Yep.
when you deal with millennials, when you deal with baby boomers, you get away with moralistic, value-driven language. Not so
Mm.
with Gen Xers, people now in
Mm.
their 50s. These are very pragmatic leaders that research every feature of every leaf blower they purchase to death. So when dealing with Gen X, facts, data, feature, that's the
Yep.
way to a Gen
Yep.
Xer's heart, so to
Yep.
speak. Yeah?
I remember. I remember as a kid on school holidays, my parents both still being at work. We'd all say goodbye in the morning. I'd go and play football all day in the park up the road with my friends. You take sandwiches and a bottle of Coke with you, a little bottle of Coke, and that would be your lunch. You'd keep an eye on down the road, and when your parents came back, that's when you went home. You just play football all day in the park.
Yeah,
That,
exactly, and
that's
that's
what
that's
you did.
that is something that was forced upon parents to
Yeah,
trust
yeah,
kids this way, and we now took
yeah.
this trust away. Now we
Mm.
have a shorter leash parenting approach,
Mm.
for better or
Mm.
worse. Who cares to put down judgment here? But
Yeah.
the idea is it just changed a generation. And
Mm.
I think it's very, very exciting to have this pragmatic generation in top leadership positions at the moment.
Mm.
In
Mm.
Australia right now, we have every state premier from Gen X. We had a Gen
Right.
X prime minister in ScoMo for a while.
Yeah.
We even had for a short time in New South Wales, we had a millennial
Mm.
at the helm of the ship, Dominic Perrottet. I never counted him as
Yeah.
a millennial because it didn't have those millennial vibes, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's the Gen X time now. And so this means
Mm.
if Gen X is, even though they're tiny, unimportant generation from the size perspective,
Yeah.
they are now in positions of power. They will drive
Mm.
the strategic direction of all of our businesses, and they will drive the policy direction of this country. So it's
Right.
absolutely crucial to understand what they care about. And as a
Mm.
generation, they have two pet projects that they're pushing. The first one is gender equality. By
Yep.
the end of the decade, the gender pay gap will be closed, period. Like, I'm
Right.
not even arguing about this,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't get away with treating men and women any differently under Gen X leadership, especially considering they're running a workforce in 10 years' time that is more than 75% millennial and Gen Z. So gender pay
Yeah.
gap closed. The
Yeah.
legal asterisk here, as we talk about the gender pay gap, different dollars for roughly the same work, that's gone. Not the gender
Mm-hmm.
income gap. That's where we're not paying
Yeah.
industries dominated by women, care jobs, education, any money.
Yeah.
So that's the negative element there. And of course, Gen X really, really cares about work-life balance because
Yeah.
they saw their parents work with themselves, to death. They saw
Mm.
the highest divorce rates ever.
Yeah.
So they figured there must be a better way to balance work and life. And so
Mm.
I would say, well, if you had to play the guessing game, where will we land on the return to the office, work from home kind of game? Gen X leadership will always, skew towards more flexibility, more freedom. That's
Mm.
Gen X.
Right.
We will still have a hybrid model for work. We'll not go
Mm-hmm.
completely remote in most businesses. For
Yeah.
some tech businesses, it might well be the future. But structurally speaking, lots of things are more difficult when you're a remote business. It is so much harder to get a sense. So productivity is not an issue. There's
Yeah.
no research that shows that you're more productive in the office than at home. We cannot let this go ahead as an argument. And
Yeah.
all the proxy data that we have, hours worked, keystrokes, stupid measurements for productivity,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
they suggest we do more at home than we do in the office.
Yeah.
So whatever. So that's not an
Mm.
argument. But knowledge
Yeah.
transfer happens much better in the office.
Mm. Mm.
And most importantly, culture, company
Yeah.
culture is so
Yeah.
much harder to establish if you work remotely.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
So I would say overall, most businesses will run a hybrid model,
Yeah.
probably at least 2 days in the office, probably more like three. But there's not much need for more
Yeah.
for most jobs.
One of the in an episode we did a while ago with Andrew Murphy, who helps coach leaders who run remote teams. One of the phrase he uses, and it's stuck with me ever since, is this transactional dialogue. When your teams are fully remote, all your dialogue is transactional in nature. It's about deadlines. When's this thing happening? Give me a status update on this. And and once you get people back into the office, even if it's the 2-3 days a week, you start removing some of that and you get some of this incidental, more relationship driven dialogue, which I think is so important.
I found beautiful research when I looked into this that said it's so important to go to the office for the cultural perspective. And the
Mm,
real
mm,
interesting caveat with this research is that it
mm,
really
mm.
doesn't matter all that much, not at all actually, whether you go
Yeah.
as a team all together into the
Mm,
office 1 day per week or 5 days per week. And
yeah.
that first blew my little mind. It's like, why? Surely
Yeah.
5 versus 1, that's a big difference. But then I
Yeah.
realized that for many, many years, I played social sports and I hung out with a bunch of guys for 2 hours a week only.
Yeah.
And I considered
Yeah.
them my dear friends. So I figured, okay,
Yeah.
granted, maybe 1 day in
Yeah.
the office is enough for this
Yeah.
social element, the sense of
Yeah.
belonging, the loyalty
Mm,
towards your coworkers. Maybe one
mm,
day is enough. But we need
mm.
at least a second day, probably a third day, to ensure that we have enough learning happening in the
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's probably helpful for most jobs. I think you can arrange it if you manage it extremely carefully. You can
Mm,
do this fully remotely, but it
yeah.
needs a very, very switched on middle management in an
Mm,
organization to
mm,
do this,
mm, mm,
to
mm.
organize events, to still occasionally create offsites together. And those
Yeah.
offsites might come at a big cost because you run hotel costs, travel costs. You probably have
Mm, mm, mm,
external
mm.
coaches. You have internal
Yeah.
training. So these things are expensive, and you then need to do
Mm,
the math.
mm,
What you want,
mm,
what you need to
mm,
do
mm.
more often. But yeah, you cannot underestimate the importance of the learning within the organization. Yeah, and
Yeah.
once you hit a certain size, you can't go around it. You need to do this.
Yeah. It seems to me that from what you've described that there almost needs to be a, a role for someone, and it's going to be in an HR function that facilitates this intergenerational understanding and finds ways to describe it that's non-confrontational, that's not finger pointing, that's just this is how people are and this is why members of our workforce act and behave the way they
Yeah,
do, and this is how we need to find a way to to better work our way around this so that everybody's getting what they want.
Yeah, totally. Just think about how we raise our kids. We tell them stuff like, you want to put yourself into this position, the position of this other
Mm,
kid.
mm,
You want
mm,
to walk
mm.
in their shoes for a day. So you
Yeah,
understand,
yeah.
we are saying those kind of things
Mm,
to our kids. We try, or we wish for them to think this way. But
mm,
it's challenging for ourselves to constantly do this because there is some human instinct that essentially says when we run into somebody who doesn't think exactly the way we do, we go, what a
mm,
moron. I
mm,
thought about
mm,
this. I
mm.
think this way. My way of looking at this is the right way. This
Yeah,
guy's just stupid. And
yeah,
we constantly need to fight this. We really need to
yeah.
understand that people literally view the world differently.
Mm,
And
mm,
we need to
mm,
all keep this in mind. And the more people you throw into a team, into a human
mm,
interaction,
mm.
the more complex this becomes. And so,
Yeah.
as an organization, yes, those things need to be very carefully managed.
Mm, mm,
And
mm.
every now and then, I think training works. Even so, my main business is doing presentations to
Yeah,
businesses.
yeah.
I do CEO workshops. I run events in organizations, whatever, at the offsites
Mm,
as well. And quite often, just my generational narrative helps people to understand. Wait a second, this is where members of my team belong. It really
mm.
softens the idea that
Yeah,
these guys are just morons.
yeah, yeah,
It
yeah,
helps you to understand that it's
yeah.
just a different perspective, and
I,
that
I think one of the I think one of the biggest things we forget as well sometimes is having respect for other people's worldviews. They might be different, but that is their view, and the respect goes both ways.
yeah,
So I think the more we can talk about it, the more we can understand it, the better we can get this respect for each other's views and less of this, which is
absolutely,
considering where the world's at the
yeah,
moment, we could probably do with a
and
bit more of that
ultimately,
anyway.
you become a better human citizen
Mm-hmm.
worker bee for this. I would argue the more perspectives you can take intellectually
Mm,
when looking at a certain issue,
mm,
a
mm.
problem, a work issue, the better your solutions are because you
Yeah.
understand it in a more complex
Mm,
way. You'll never ever be smart enough and multifaceted enough to really fully understand reality or really fully understand anything.
yeah.
But you
Yeah.
can inch closer to it by taking multiple perspectives, by in a
Mm,
team
mm.
inviting multiple perspectives at an issue, and then you get
Yeah.
better. And I think the more
Mm,
perspectives, the better informed you are to make a right decision in whatever the context is.
yeah.
Yeah, and I of course specialize on telling people the demographic perspective,
Mm, mm,
workforce issues, just market issues, and the
mm.
generational narrative. I think if you understand those things a bit more,
Yeah.
you're better at whatever you do. Just a
Yeah.
tiny bit better, but a bit better
Mm,
is goes a long way.
yeah. I'm mindful of time. With if we were going to give some people some stuff to take away, then I'm going to put your contact details in the link. So if people want to talk to you directly, they can do. But recognizing these core differences in the generations, I think is a key takeaway. Re-listen to this. You know, I'll put timestamps in the video, so wherever people are finding this, they can jump straight to those parts. Thinking about this return to work mandate, should it be mandated? How many days a week are you going to be coming back? Can people get as much value from one day a week as they do out of three or four? Possibly. You're saying that the data or the research is saying that yes, possibly it does. But businesses also need to, I think, own their own destiny in terms of the workforce challenges that are coming, because there is this collision of circumstances that are happening that aren't going to go away.
Yeah, or I just as a gut feeling, I would shy
Yeah,
away from mandates
yeah, yeah.
because then you have people just going to the office at some point in order to make
Mm,
sure
mm,
that they reach the statistical
yeah.
average of 2 or 3 days per week
Mm,
throughout
mm,
the year.
mm,
That's bullshit.
mm,
You don't need
mm.
this. I
Yeah,
want you to be smart about it. Think about the
yeah,
tasks of your workforce.
yeah.
Your staff will have roughly two different types of tasks. One type
Mm,
of task is I would call them a technical, quiet thinking task, them reading emails, writing emails,
Yeah.
programming, moving boxes
Mm.
around on PowerPoint,
Yeah.
that type of stuff. You
Mm.
don't need colleagues for that. You do
Yeah.
this by yourself. If you
Mm.
want to do this in your home, if your home is peaceful and quiet, you do this at
Yeah.
home. If your home
Mm.
is noisy, you will flee to the office. That's fine.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
But that give workers a choice to decide where they do those tasks,
Yeah.
because there is another part of your work day, of your work tasks. These tasks are interpersonal in nature. These are creative
Mm.
in nature. When
Yeah.
you need to,
Yeah.
you are better off
Mm. Mm.
from a work's perspective. Just if you don't look at what the worker wants, what's the boss wants, but what the work
Yeah.
itself wants, to
Yeah.
do this in the office. When you are creative, brainstorming with other
Mm.
people,
Mm.
when you
Mm.
are doing the initial discussions of a what a project might look like, when you draw the project roadmap and so forth, that stuff is best done in person.
Yeah.
It is so much better. We know this, that it's
Mm.
better in
Mm.
person.
Mm.
So why
Mm.
wouldn't you go
Mm.
into the office then? And give your staff the freedom to, we'll never perfectly get there, but you could essentially, if you look at
Mm.
your week ahead, you go, well, I have about 2 days, 3 days worth of quiet thinking tasks. I do them Monday to Wednesday, and then Thursday and Friday I'm in the office. It will never
Yeah.
be that clean. But
Mm.
give
Mm.
staff the opportunity of doing this. Why would you mandate a staff member in the office if
Yep.
they have a full week of quiet thinking stuff ahead,
Mm.
where
Mm.
they just need
Mm.
to hunker down and do something? It's
Yeah.
silly.
Mm. Mm.
So, and then you just feel, a stupid rule forced upon you. That's what
Yeah.
kids feel like when they get a stupid parental rule. You don't want
Mm.
your
Mm.
adult staff to be put into this position. That is
Yeah.
embarrassing to be in this.
Mm.
So you need to
Mm.
be
Mm.
smart, not prescriptive, but you need to trust your team, and you need
Mm.
to trust your team managers to manage those things. It's
Yeah.
more labor intensive to manage a week, who's in the office when
Mm.
and so forth, than it was in
Yeah.
the past. But I think that's needed now, and I don't really see an alternative to it.
Yeah. One thing I did want to ask you was your opinion on job tenure. So I think the latest LinkedIn data is showing that in the tech space, the average job tenure at the moment is 1.3 years. Don't quote me, but it's something like that. Why is it just that tech workers have more options, more choices these days? What's driving this?
Well, I think we see a similar trend of staying in a job for shorter periods of time across all
Hmm.
industries.
Right.
And I'm not happy with the standard narrative of, oh, it's just those uncommittal, flaky young people
Mm-hmm.
shifting careers back and forth. So it's true that if you change your career more regularly, you probably end up with higher pay. You just,
Yeah.
you know, job switch yourself into a higher pay bracket.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as an organization, I would want to be aware of that. I go, what can I do in order to improve staff retention? The first one is,
Yep.
what can I do with my money? Yeah, if
Mm-hmm.
you constantly give people a bit more money, if you drip
Mm.
feed more money into them, they
Yeah.
constantly feel that they're moving in the right direction. Yeah,
Yeah.
that of course assumes that you have plenty of money to go around. If you're an early
Mm. Mm.
startup, you don't have endless money to float around. What
Yeah.
then do you have to offer? Is this equity in a business? Is this the flexibility that you offer? Is it a keen a proud project that people really
Mm.
are keen
Mm.
on working about? What is keeping people in your organization?
Yeah.
And I think in a remote organization, it is even easier to quickly
Mm.
change job, because
Mm. Mm.
who
Yeah.
cares what kind of platform you log into
Mm.
and what
Mm.
kind of
Mm.
2D character you talk for half an hour
Yeah.
on the Zoom call.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter all that much. It's not the
Mm.
human connection where you actually feel loyalty towards your
Yeah.
coworkers. Yeah, so be strategic
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
this, because
Mm.
as we said at the beginning of this conversation, the skills shortage is here to stay. The skills shortage will
Mm.
not get better. So just
Yeah.
assuming that you'll ever always have young, keen tech workers is difficult.
Mm.
Yeah, it's thinking that you can just forever onwards tap into an dirt cheap pool of overseas workforce. Who says that this will not go up in price? It will
Yeah. Yeah.
go up in price,
Yeah.
but be
Yeah.
strategic. Think long term in this, and
Mm.
actually have a
Mm.
strategy about how you
Yeah.
retain your staff and how you manage your staff.
Yeah. We're complex things, people, aren't we?
Yeah. Oh, we are, and all of this, of course, happens within absolutely rock hard economic circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah.
if you just need a bucket load of money to get by, from a housing perspective, people will increasingly make their decisions based on the paycheck.
Yeah.
Which is, the tech sector can at least theoretically create quite a bit of income, but this is even more shocking news if you look at stuff like teacher shortage, aged care shortage. These are two industries that are ludicrous. Obviously important cornerstone jobs in this country, big workforces as well, but where the hell do they take their workers from?
Yeah. It's that thing of for all employers is also remembering why do people change jobs? They do it to make their lives better, not because they suddenly buy in. Very rarely because they suddenly buy into the mission of XYZ company. It's for them to earn more, maybe, but to be closer to work, to have more responsibility, to work on better technology, whatever it might be. People change jobs for them, not for companies.
Exactly. And keep doing stuff like actually talking to your staff. This can be formal staff surveys, but if your business is smaller, that'd be silly. Just be in constant conversation with your staff. And as a boss, when we talk about the work from home or return to office mandates, have an dollar value, have an absolute exact dollar value ready, what it costs your staff member to go to the office. What's the financial output that they need to invest into the joy of going to the office? How much more expensive is it what do they pay for travel? Public transport, bike, car parking, whatever it is. And then what is the difference between lunch and coffee costs in the office versus lunch and coffee costs at home? Be serious about this. How much more complex is the childcare pickup stuff for your older staff? Have those in dollar and minute values ready. Don't just say stuff like, I always went to the office for the last 30 years and now those youngins are complaining. That is not helpful for anyone. Again, put yourselves into the shoes of your staff.
Respect the other person's version of the world.
Absolutely.
I love it. I could talk to you all day. For me, it'd be kind of interesting. For you, it'd probably get a bit boring. And for listeners, it would be the longest podcast in the world. Simon Kuestenmacher, thank you so much. This has been an absolute pleasure. And great first name as well, by the way. Just so I dropped that out.
Absolutely. It's been great fun talking to another Simon.
Thank you, my friend. All the best.
Cheers.